Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
Welcome to another edition of Blue Republican Radio with me, the original Blue Republican, Robin Koerner. I am glad, as always, to have you with me and with my guest, David Spring. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that we haven't tackled on this show at all yet, which maybe is quite surprising because it is a topic that has really motivated people all over the political spectrum, and especially a lot of my more pro-liberty, more conservative friends as well. I'm talking about Common Core. And I think that's almost become like a red flag word, like a symbol of something for people who maybe have seen it on their Facebook feeds with those, I'm sure we've all seen those little maths problems. And I don't know to what extent they're anything to do with Common Core, but it's coming up on my Facebook feed a lot, you know, those crazy new math methods and all that stuff. All by way of saying, I'm sure you've heard the term, and maybe you think you know what it's all about, but you probably don't know as much as this guy that I am speaking to today about Common Core. As I said, his name is David Spring, and he has recently written a book entitled Weapons of Mass Deception about Common Core and the war against our public schools. David, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here and discussing this with me.
Robin, thank you for having me.
You bet. No, this is obviously an important topic. The education of our children is necessarily important. Let me invite you, first off, to just introduce yourself a little, and in particular, how and why you became so passionate about this topic.
Well, about a year and a half ago now, I am an instructor, an adult education instructor at Bellevue College in Seattle, Washington. At least I was for 20 years. My wife is an instructor at Shoreline College, which is also near Seattle, Washington. She also teaches adult education classes, and part of adult basic education, she teaches English as a second language, but she also has taught adult basic education to students who, for whatever reason, did not have their high school diploma. And they historically have taken something called the GED, or it's a general equivalency, high school equivalency test, and that gives them a certificate that allows them to go on and get a job or go to college. It's a very, very important function. We've had these GED certificates ever since about 1945, after World War II, and for the veterans coming home from these wars who didn't have a high school diploma. My wife came home one day, and she said, all the students are flunking. Nobody can get a GED certificate. And she was actually in tears. She said, a company called Pearson has taken over the GED. This is a private for-profit corporation. And they changed the test to align with something called Common Core. And I said, well, what's Common Core, and what does it have to do with all the kids flunking out? And that was when we began the research. I also taught or took courses in math item analysis at the University of Washington as part of my master's degree. And I studied the questions that Pearson had changed. It used to be that they asked questions that were of average difficulty for a high school senior. However, they changed the questions around to make it such that less than 10 or 20% of high school seniors could answer these math questions. And in fact, less than 10 or 20% of college students could answer these math questions, and less than 10 to 20% of our state legislature and even college professors can answer these questions. These are unbelievably difficult questions. And so we started wondering why. Why is Pearson doing this? What is Common Core? What is the purpose of Common Core? And it eventually became clear to us that it has nothing to do with helping kids. It's all about destroying the public schools, destroying the education system, so that a group of private billionaires can kind of take it over and turn it into a for-profit money-making machine.
Okay, so taking that lead, David, what then is Common Core?
Okay, so Common Core is actually a set of standards. The claim is, the popular myth is that Common Core was started by a group of people in about 2008, a group of Wall Street consultants who met with Bill Gates, and Bill Gates agreed to give them funding to develop this set of national learning standards. It would be like what you need to know in kindergarten, what you need to know in the first grade or the second grade. So these are called learning standards. We've had learning standards, for at least 30 or 40 years, but these were different learning standards. And when we researched the history of them, what we found was that the myth was not true, that the standards have actually been, they started creating these standards and Bill Gates started funding them in the 1990s. That this was actually like a 20-year plan. And the plan really wasn't about helping the schools or making us competitive internationally or anything. It really was that we spent about $700 billion per year on our public schools here in the United States. And people wanted a kind of national uniform set of standards so that they could turn them into computer programs, get rid of the teachers, have the kids taken over. But you need to convince parents. Parents are not just going to give up their public schools unless they believe the schools are failing. So these were standards that were not designed to help kids. These were actually standards that were designed to confuse kids and confuse their parents and confuse teachers. So you mentioned the math problems, and this is one thing that you do see all over Facebook. And part of the theory, now I have been a math instructor, and I've studied this for years. Part of the theory of Common Core is it's almost like the book 1984 by George Orwell, that what you want to do is to confuse people. They tell children, for example, historically, if you wanted to add 3 plus 11, you would like combine the 1 and the 3 and get a 4, and you bring down the 1 and you get 14. And it's pretty quick to add 3 and 11. But the Common Core way of addition is what we used to call subtraction. That you would actually take the 11 from 20 and you'd get 9, and you'd subtract the 3 from the 10, and you'd get 7, then you'd subtract the 9 and the 3 and add them together, and eventually you might come up with an answer. But Common Core really doesn't care what the answer is to 11 plus 3, because what it's all about, it's a method.
Hold on, so stop right there, David, because now I'm already confused. If Common Core is a set of standards, then by definition it's not a method and vice versa. So how can it, which one is it?
Okay, so the truth of the matter is that standards always dictate curriculum, and they always dictate teaching. The teachers teach to the standards, teachers teach to the test. That when you have a lesson plan, you've got some objectives, and the objectives are your learning standards. And then they claim that, people have complete freedom. In fact, this is not what Common Core is at all. Some people have described Common Core as turning teachers into robots and turning students into robots. And it's one reason why libertarians are opposed to this, because they believe in freedom of thought and freedom of liberty and all this sort of stuff, and freedom of expression and the First Amendment. Common Core is the exact opposite. Every teacher has to say the same sentence. Every student has to repeat the same sentence. And so it becomes like propaganda.
Now, hold on, David. So let me make sure I understand, because I think this is super important as we begin the show. It seems to me that it is much more than that. You're saying it's not just a set of standards. You're saying it's actually, it requires a very specific methodology in teaching, right down in some instances to, the specific information that is in the sentences that teachers say. Are you making that claim? Because that's a huge, is that true?
Oh, absolutely. They're controlling the intent of the standards, of which there are thousands of these standards, is to control every minute of every hour of a classroom instruction. They want to control not only what people think, but the way people think it.
Got it. Okay. So when we say standards, it sounds like the word standards here has an atypical meaning, because these aren't just some generalized goals that can be achieved in various ways depending on the students and the teacher. The standards are actually, if you like, standards within the method, within the process, standards that apply to each step of the process of teaching, not just where you have to get.
Yeah, so you have to understand here that the goal is more about controlling, if you can control the way people think, and you can destroy their self-confidence. Kids can be very confident. They're concrete thinkers. If you give a kid 3 apples and you give a kid 2 more apples, they can be really confident. They look, they see 5 apples. They know there's 5 fingers on their hand, and that builds their self-esteem. But instead, if you try to make them think abstractly, which their brains are not able to do, that they've got to take the 5 and they've got to subtract it from the 10, then what winds up happening is the kid's self-esteem is destroyed, and it's easier to control the child.
Okay, this is a fascinating discussion. I'm talking to David Spring about Common Core. We're going into the first break. This is Blue Republican Radio. We will be back shortly.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
The War State by Michael Swanson is a must-read for anyone interested in the critical 20 years after World War II, when the United States morphed from a constitutional republic to a global imperial superpower. Get The War State by Michael Swanson from Amazon.com today.
This is Blue Republican Radio, and my name is Robin Koerner. Thanks for being with me. I'm talking to David Spring, author of the book Weapons of Mass Deception, about Common Core, a phrase that many of us, especially many of us who are politically interested and motivated, have heard, but maybe we don't know quite as much as we think we do. I know I don't know very much, but I'm learning a lot already here speaking to David. David, when we went into the break, you talked about, you made what sounds like a very strong claim. And again, you correct me if I'm wrong. You were talking about the intention behind Common Core. Now, when you start speaking to intent, you're making claims about, what's in somebody's head. And in this case, it sounds quite nefarious. Let's go back to that. What actually are the intentions, and what is the evidence on which those strong claims are based?
Okay, so before the break, I was talking about the hard math problems. A lot of parents and teachers say, why did they make the math so convoluted? What is the problem with adding 3 plus 2? Why can't we just keep adding 3 plus 2? We've been doing it for thousands of years. Let's just go ahead and stay with that. Why do we need this new math? Okay? Well, in addition to lowering the self-esteem of the student, another important characteristic of making math convoluted, by adding you have to subtract, and by subtracting you have to add, and you'll just simply look on Facebook, you'll see some of the oddball problems out there. But there is a couple of other things that happen. One is that the teacher themselves is taken out of the equation. When you turn a teacher into a robot, the teacher no longer becomes a person. And an important part of education, an important part of human development, is building relationships between children and their teachers, and between children and their parents. If a child goes home with a Common Core math problem, it is quite likely that even as young as the 2nd or 3rd grade, and even as young as kindergarten, that their parent will not be able to answer the problem, because this has nothing to do with how their parents were taught math. And the student will see the frustrated look on the parent's face. The parent might even blow up and start saying curse words. And the student will then feel that their godlike parent and their godlike teachers are not so godlike after all. And that is intended to break up the relationship of the child with the parent, the child with the teacher. It's intended to isolate the child, to turn the child into a robot so that the child can be easier to control. Now, as far as my evidence of this, we do have we did write a 400-page book about all this. And it's called Weapons of Mass Deception. And we have a website that people can go read at least half the book, and certainly the section on Common Core, we put it all on there. That website is called weaponsofmassdeception.org. And I would just encourage people to take the time to read and think about, why would it that you couldn't add 2 plus 3 the old-fashioned way?
So I followed you. Now, I can understand how standards that require the teaching of these obscure mathematical methods. And by the way, I'm a physics major. My degree's in physics. So I've seen them and I've gone, what the hell? I can see that the outcomes could be exactly as you've described. The bit that I want to get to, though, is you're saying that those outcomes were intended, that there were negative intent. I mean, I could imagine somebody coming up with this going, especially Bill Gates, I could imagine him saying, look, we want to educate our children. Children are being failed disproportionately in certain parts of the country. We need standards that ensure that all the ground is covered. It might be useful if, those standards include methods that they maybe believe work. I could see that you could get these bad outcomes with good intent. Maybe misguided in good intent, but good intent. But you've said the word intent or intended a lot. So how are you getting that there's nefarious purpose behind this?
Well, so it's why the book became 400 pages long. We went over the history of how this stuff started in the 1980s and the 1990s. And essentially what happened was, when they did come up with the standards, they were not written by teachers. Our prior Washington standards were all written by teachers. Like our math standards were written by a committee of about 100 high school and college math teachers, and this is true about most states. We were rated as having among the highest standards in the nation. They had to get rid of our good math standards in order to replace them with bad math standards. Now, Common Core was not written by teachers. In fact, Common Core was written by 2 or 3 Wall Street consultants. And the question becomes, why would you want Wall Street consultants writing standards instead of teachers? The standards were reviewed by several teachers on this review panel, and the teachers rejected the standards. They refused to sign off on the final standards. The standards were reviewed by hundreds of child development consultants, and hundreds of child development consultants signed a petition opposing the Common Core standards. Wow. Why do we continue on with standards that are opposed by teachers, opposed by college professionals, opposed by child development professionals? And it's because there's a different agenda.
Okay, so which I think leads into the next important question, which is, given that, again, that makes a lot of sense, why would it be those standards written by, let's say, those Wall Street consultants that would be adopted as federal standards over the heads of many people in the education sector who know better?
Right. And so what happens is the guy who put up, there are several billionaires behind this, but the main billionaire, his name is Bill Gates. He's the richest man in the world. You've probably heard of him. And he put up over 90% of the funding for this project. It actually amounts to billions of dollars that were actually diverted away from the tax system. So this isn't even Bill's money. It's like taxpayer money that got run through his kind of education foundation, the Gates Foundation. But what happened is Bill has so much money, he was able to set up dozens, maybe even hundreds of front groups. These are fake groups that act like they're public nonprofit organizations, but in fact they're nothing but fronts for Bill Gates. And he has so much money that he was actually able to buy his way into the Obama administration with a guy named Arne Duncan, who is the Secretary of Education. Arne hired a whole pile of people from the Gates Foundation, and they created something called Race to the Top. Now, before Race to the Top, we had something called No Child Left Behind. And that's why we have to go over the history of how all this stuff happened. But No Child Left Behind was an utter failure. But Race to the Top is like No Child Left Behind on steroids. It is much worse than No Child Left Behind. And the reason it's much worse is they took about, a few $100 million, maybe even more than $1 billion, and they used it to bribe the states. States were desperate for money. It was after the crash of 2008. They had no money to fund the public schools. And what Arne said is, gee, we've got all this stimulus money here, like hundreds of millions of dollars of stimulus money, and if you'll just do one little thing for us, we will give you hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, I would kind of call that a bribe, but they actually just simply call it normal politics. And the one thing that they needed to do was drop their previous standards and replace them with Common Core standards, and then tie those Common Core standards to one of 2 Common Core tests. And these tests are called PARC, which is PARCC, and SBAC, which is SBAC, and they actually mean something, we just call them PARC and SBAC, are the two Common Core tests. They spent $300 million of taxpayer money developing these two tests, and about 20 states or 25 states adopted the SBAC, and 20 or 25 states adopted PARC. We have a map on our website that shows you which states adopted which ones. But then what happened was there was kind of buyer's remorse. The states realized, particularly, it was ironic, the Republican states realized this first. And I think what caused them to realize that they started calling Common Core, the people did in those states, they started calling it Obama Core, because it literally was Obama and Arnie Duncan who was forcing this federal thing on their state, and they just basically didn't like anything Obama did. And it became toxic for people in Republican states to even support it. So they passed resolutions, they got rid of it in about 20 states, and then the Democratic states started getting into it. So that's where we're at right now. Everybody's running away from Common Core like rats leaving a sinking ship.
Okay, this is Blue Republican Radio. We are talking to David Spring about Common Core. We're going into the break.
Affordable health insurance was the promise of Obamacare. But for many, the government mandate caused more problems than it solved. This is Dr. Elena George from Medicine on Call, and I want to tell you about a truly affordable alternative allowed under Obamacare, Liberty HealthShare. Liberty HealthShare bypasses doctor and hospital panels, giving you the freedom to choose. And with a maximum of $500 out-of-pocket per person and 100% coverage up to $1 million per year per occurrence, you can rest assured knowing you and your family are protected. Coverage starts as low as $107 per month and also includes dental, vision, pharmacy, and holistic care. Liberty HealthShare puts you back in charge of your health. Visit them online at libertyoncall.org. Again, for a true affordable alternative to Obamacare, visit libertyoncall.org or call toll-free 1-800-714-6993 today.
You're listening to Robin Koerner, the original Blue Republican, talking about Common Core to the author of the book Weapons of Mass Deception, David Spring. David, when we went into the break, you were explaining that soon after the adoption of Common Core in the States, that there were, to use your words, buyer's remorse. And first with the Republican states, and then a little later the Democratic states, who decided that this thing that they'd happily accepted along with the federal dollar bribe, they didn't happily accept quite as much going forward. What happened? Why the remorse?
Well, what the states were not told about Common Core was that the tests themselves were designed to fail 2/3 to 3/4 of the students, which led parents realize that their students are not failures and that what's happening here is a bad test. And the parents started kind of what's called an opt-out movement, where parents started just rejecting these tests. They weren't going to expose their kids to it. Their kids would come home in tears because the kids couldn't do the Common Core lessons. The parents would be in tears shortly thereafter because the parents couldn't do the Common Core lesson. And pretty soon they started contacting their legislators. The legislators looked over the tests and looked over the curriculum, and then the legislators were in tears. And so eventually a lot of states started backing out, and today the majority of states started backing out. After we wrote the book, the very next thing that we did, we live in Washington State, which is technically considered a Democratic state. We have a Democratic governor and Democratic House and stuff. And we pursued within the Democratic Party. I wrote a resolution. The Republican Party a year earlier had passed a resolution unanimously condemning Common Core and the Common Core SBAC test and saying, we want out, okay? The Democrats, so it's a little bit harder because when you got a Democratic president saying that they want Common Core and you got a Democratic governor saying he wants Common Core, it's tough to go against your party leader. So it's a harder sell for Democrats. But nevertheless, we got a resolution passed in King County here in Washington and several legislative districts. And then we took it to the state party meeting in January of this year. And people said it would never pass. The governor literally had the Democratic leader of the Senate give a 5-minute speech talking about how this would kill the Democratic Party if we pass this resolution against Common Core and SBAC. The delegates to the state party, which there are 300 there, over 200 of them voted for the resolution. We won the resolution by a 2-to-1 vote against our own president, our own governor, and all the leaders of our own party.
Wow.
That just goes to show that the voters are parents first and the Republicans and Democrats second. They really don't care about either political party. All they care about is not harming their kids and helping their kids. So that's where we're at now. We started a website after that called optoutwashington.org. And we over 25,000 parents downloaded our opt-out form and visited the website. A group of parents on Bainbridge Island got so upset by the SBAC test, they actually paid, we still don't know who these people were, but they paid hundreds of dollars and put up hundreds of signs all over Bainbridge Island saying to go to Opt Out Washington and get your form. The Bainbridge Island School District led the nation in opting out of the SBAC test. The state of Washington led the nation, the first state in the nation where more than 5% of the students opted out of the Common Core test. We had more than 10% of our students opting out. And just a couple of weeks ago, Arne Duncan issued a threat to our state that he's going to try to withhold federal funding. We believe it's an idle threat because the new Education Act being passed through Congress right now prohibits Arne Duncan from punishing the states for opting out of Common Core and the Common Core tests.
And let's be very clear. I mean, there is no doubt constitutionally that this is the purview of the states and not the federal government, right?
Well, this is what a lot of people say. A lot of people, particularly libertarians, tend to carry around a copy of the Constitution in their pocket. And they tend to memorize that Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they refer specifically to the 10th Amendment,
right,
and also to several speeches by Thomas Jefferson, who they happen to like. And the both Thomas Jefferson and the U.S. Constitution and the 10th Amendment are quite clear that education is a state right, and everybody believes if this ever went to court, that the federal government has completely overstepped their bound. This is kind of a federal takeover of the public schools. And the new Education Act, which was approved by the Senate and it's being negotiated between the Senate and House, I read it. And it has several hundred pages saying what Arne Duncan is not allowed to do. Okay, it's almost like he's not allowed to even walk into his own office or open his own mail anymore. But they have literally, they have said, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, on and on for hundreds of pages. That's how ticked off they are at Obama and Arne Duncan, and it's passing by supermajorities in the House and the Senate that can override any presidential veto. So I think it's going to become law in the next few months, and then restore us to the Constitution.
That's extraordinary that this has got that much clear support. Your position here has got that much clear support among the powers that be. I mean, supermajorities on a bill like that, it's not something you hear every day.
It passed unanimously. We have not had any bills passed in the Senate unanimously for years. You know, they just tend to fight with each other all the time.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of April or beginning of May, they had a vote in the Senate Health Committee, which is their education committee, and the bill cleared that committee unanimously. Every member of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, senators from everywhere, and it also passed through, by a huge supermajority. I think there's only 8 or 9 votes in the Senate that voted against it.
Okay, so this kind of recalls for me a question I wanted to ask you earlier in the interview, which is, given all of that, why the support from the White House and from these Democratic governors? What's in it for them? Is it as simple as the people that are pushing this funded, you know, the higher echelons, the Democratic Party in their campaigns, which is a kind of like a standard answer to a lot of these questions? Or is there more to it? I mean, why all this support from Obama, etc.?
Well, I like to say that in my opinion, we've been looking at this wrong for the past 10 or 20 years. Both parties would like you to believe that, it's just a fight between the Republicans and Democrats, and all we got to do is either get rid of the Republicans or get rid of the Democrats, and everything would be better. That's not my experience. My experience is that there are many different kinds of people in the Republican Party and many different kinds of people in the Democratic Party. And so I like to call it maybe like the People's Party versus the Billionaires Party, or the People's Party versus the Wall Street Party, that there is a tremendous amount of corruption in both the Republican and the Democratic Party. It's hard for us to admit that, but the bottom line is money controls elections. The person who has the most money wins 90% of the elections. And so it's natural, if you're corrupt, that you're going to want to go along with the richest people in the world.
Right. So the answer to the question, you might say, is political business as usual.
Right. Unfortunately, we're trying to fight that. We're trying to get money out of politics. I think Common Core is not only an attack on our public school, it's an attack on our democracy. That it's showing the power of the billionaires to literally dictate terms to all the rest of us. And the only good news is they're completely outnumbered by parents. When you harm children and get parents mad, then suddenly you have a powerful political force. And so the people in Congress and even in the White House need to recognize that Common Core and these Common Core tests are a toxic issue. These people will be driven out of office. There are leaders of the presidential candidates for the Republican Party that are in favor of Common Core, like I believe his name is Bush. And then in the Democratic Party, one of their candidates who's in favor of Common Core is called Clinton. And there are people in both parties running for president who are opposed to the high-stakes tests, opposed to Common Core, and in fact Bernie Sanders voted against No Child Left Behind. Rand Paul has spoken out against this. So there are people in both political parties who are opposed to it, and there's people in favor of it. And the 2016 election is going to turn out to be a very interesting election if parents get involved.
This sounds like, from what you've said, actually one of the biggest party crossover issues of our time, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
Bipartisan issues.
Absolutely. There is many. First of all, I live in East King County, which is actually a Republican area, and I'm kind of a Democrat. But all my friends are Republicans. They all hate this, okay? They do get out their constitutions. They start quoting from the Constitution. But the Democrats also, they don't like the idea of the schools being destroyed and all the money going to the billionaires. And so there is a tremendous amount of crossover, and it's something, we can agree to fight later about these minor issues, but right now what we need to do is unite. It's sad that the leading candidates, unfortunately, are the pro-billionaire, pro-Common Core candidates. So that it does make it kind of difficult.
I just want to reiterate. You said you're broadly a Democrat. Did I hear you right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want.
I'm the leader of the Democratic Party. At least I'm on the board of the Progressive Caucus here in Washington State. I ran for office several times, so I am a pretty well-known Democrat. Okay, so I just want to flag that for the listeners. I mean, you're not just saying the extent to which this is a bipartisan issue, and I know that most of my friends who've been, horrified about Common Core have, identify as conservative or Republican or libertarian. So here is a Democrat. Well, I mean, this is interesting. Do you identify as a liberal, or do you just eschew these labels? I don't really like labels. What I am is I'm a parent, and I'm trying to get funding for our public schools. My parents and grandparents were Democrats, which is the main reason why I'm a Democrat. I kind of liken it to being a Catholic or a Protestant, that people just have a particular point of view. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I believe the correct way to look at issues is what I call issue-based advocacy. We need to look at the particular issue, and I am thrilled. I mean, people have asked me just to become a Republican or Libertarian or whatever, but I am thrilled that people in the Republican Party read the Constitution. Maybe we need people in the Democratic Party to start reading the Constitution.
Well, this is the Blue Republican and myself, we have pushed this expression, constitutional liberal. The Bill of Rights is a profoundly, in its proper sense of the word, liberal document.
Thomas Jefferson, he did talk about the importance of public schools and its relationship to democracy.
Yes.
You destroy the public schools, you destroy democracy. And I think, actually, that's why I say that this is an attack on our democracy.
Okay. I can understand. The coherence of that. Okay, so we've only got about 4 minutes left in this segment. Another, I guess, obvious question. If the political winds are blowing so hard in the direction that you've described, why would the likes of Clinton and Bush running for president not be ahead of this very obvious curve? Why would they think that they could do better opposing their own, most of the people in their own party and, American parents, if they have whatever campaign funding they're going to get from these rich guys? Because they can't, I know money's important, but you can't take money at the obvious expense of votes. Why are they taking this position that they're taking? This pro-Common Core position, if what you say is right?
Well, I think they are counting on the American people not knowing what's going on, being in the dark, not doing their research, not paying attention, and they are counting on money buying the election. Each of them has hundreds of millions or maybe even billions of dollars, and they know they're hoping that some sort of TV ad is going to carry them through, and they could be right. What I tell people they need to do to stop this, we wrote the book to try to inform and warn people. We want people to read the book. We want them to read the website. And we want them to get informed. If people get informed, and I think what's going to motivate them to get informed, this fall, for the first time nationally, they're going to announce the results. Up until now, there's only been a couple of pilot states in Kentucky, New York, where they announce the results. But this fall, they're going to announce, and they're going to tell all the parents in America that their kids are failures. I believe that that's going to be a window of opportunity. It's going to wake these parents up. Whether the Republicans or Democrats or independents are going to start doing some research. And when they do, what I want them to do is go join their local party. It doesn't matter to me what party they join. Start attending political meetings. Start making their voice heard and supporting candidates who are opposed. Because the candidates who are opposed to Common Core and these Common Core tests, those are the honest candidates. And the ones who support Common Core and SBAC, in my opinion, are not as honest. And they're just simply going with the money.
And just to be clear, again, to go back to a point that we started this show with, because I think it really is maybe the most important point about Common Core. You're not opposed to the existence of reasonable general standards saying, we want all of our kids educated to this level, understanding, differentiation and integration in mathematics, for example, by the time they're 16 or 18. That's not really the objection. The problem here is the methods required under the term standards, but I think standards isn't a good term. We're talking about specific methodologies that are having negative impacts on the teaching by teachers and the learning by students. We're talking about the damage done by those specifics, right?
Yeah, I want to be clear. We are, and I support any type of thing that actually helps children, and it's certainly well-written standards that are developmentally appropriate, like we used to have. All teachers are in favor of those. All teachers use standards. All teachers are in favor of authentic assessment. My master's degree is in child development. I absolutely understand the importance of having standards, measurable standards, but standards need to be reasonable. You need to set the bar. If you have a 3-foot child, you don't set the bar that they have to jump over at 10 feet. You set the bar at 2 or 3 feet so they can build their confidence, and over time they can learn to jump over higher and higher bars. But what we're seeing here is standards that are not developmentally appropriate, that were not written by teachers, and tests that are designed to fail children instead of helping children and building their self-esteem and letting them know where the weak areas are, where they can improve. These are not those kind of tests. So our schools have changed dramatically. They are not the schools that we had 10 or 20 years ago, and that's what all parents need to be aware of.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, this has been a very interesting interview. We'll be coming back for the final segment in just a minute or two. This is Robin Koerner, and this is Blue Republican Radio. Thanks for being with me. Welcome back to Blue Republican Radio. We're coming to the close of this show on Common Core. David, if there are any parents who have been, looking at the stuff their children have been bringing home and they are concerned about Common Core, or indeed if there are any grandparents who are concerned about their children going through Common Core, you mentioned an opt-out movement. In the last couple of minutes of the show, tell us again what parents, grandparents and concerned citizens can do about this.
Well, one thing, so we have a website, optoutwashington.org. They can go there and they can get an opt-out form. It is intended for Washington State, but there are similar opt-out policies all over the United States. And they definitely want to opt their kids out of these tests. These are not fair tests. They're not designed to help kids or evaluate them. They're just designed to flunk them. They also should be joining, in addition to joining their political parties or whatever and going to the monthly political party meetings, they should join their PTA. They should talk with other parents. They should talk with teachers. They should read their children's books. They should understand what their children are being subjected to. Build a relationship and talk to your kid about what's going on in the school. And, get more active, and we can overcome this if we can get 10% of the kids to opt out. Just in Washington State in a 3-month period in Bill Gates' home state. Any parent in any state can start a similar movement. There's a national opt-out movement. There are opt-out movements in virtually every state. There are opt-out movements all over Facebook. So there is plenty of things that people can do, and they need to start doing it now to protect our kids and to get ready for the 2016 election.
Okay, we've got 30 seconds left. I hope you can answer this in this short period. If you opt out of the test, if you opt your children out of the test, aren't they still subjected to the methods in the classroom? How do they opt out of those?
Well, you asked a really good question. If we can defeat the test, we can defeat the Common Core standards, and we can go back to normal standards. This is just one way that parents can have a voice. Some people are actually pulling their kids out of schools. And now, I understand this. Nobody wants kids to be subject to harm, but we can't all pull our kids out of schools. And this would still lead to the death of our democracy and the death of our schools. So I say opt your kid out. That's the best thing you can do. Okay, thank you so much. Wow, this really was very interesting. David, I appreciate your time. The book is Weapons of Mass Deception. The author is David Spring. Thanks for being with me on Blue Republican Radio. Go to bluerepublican.org.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.